Hi, welcome to our first video in this series of videos that is going to teach the basics of Python. So here I have my editor or IDE, and what I've done is to increase the font size so that it will be easier for people that are watching on small devices or phones to be able to see clearly what I input. I've had the experience of watching other videos where the font size is too small that even in the full screen mode you struggle to see what is in there. So I hope this is going to help out. Right, so the first thing we're going to look at is called the print function. Okay, so called print function. Alright, so let me number them quickly, and I'll just indent them, and then I'll say the next thing is that we're going to look at our variables. Okay, so on the variables we're going to talk about naming them. We'll talk about the assignment operator. We'll also talk about statement or expression. Statement or expression. We're also going to talk about value. Alright, so from here the next thing we're going to talk about is objects. Alright, and we are done for this video. Alright, so let me quickly make this beautiful so we can move on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out as a docstring. So now we're starting with the print function. So in Python there's a lot of stuff in Python that we can make use of. They are called functions. Alright, so basically a function is a set of codes which have already been crafted. They have been put together to do something specific. So I could write a function that adds two numbers. And for instance, in Python there's a function called the random function. It helps you to be able to pick numbers randomly from a certain range of numbers. So that's basically an explanation of a function. So the most important function you need to know as a beginner is the print function. So in my IDE here, whatever I type, for instance, let's say I want Python to work out 3 plus 2, which we know as 5. If I want Python to run this, I put this here and I run the script. It opens up the shell and I'm expecting to see 5. Let me resize this in a moment. I'm expecting to see 5, but I'm not seeing it. So I'm keeping this window here so that it doesn't keep on popping up at places I don't want it to be. So I was expecting Python to show me 5 because 3 plus 2 is 5, but it doesn't. What I've done here is to ask Python to evaluate 3 plus 2, but I didn't ask Python to output it. It's different if I was in the shell and I type. Python will just give me the answer straight away, but once I'm in the editor, what I need to do is to say, Python, please print the value that you get after you evaluate this statement of 3 plus 2. Alright, so the structure of a print function is what I've already stated here. It's a print, the word print with brackets, right? And whatever you put inside the bracket, Python knows that it has to make it visible in the shell. Right. So if I want to see this appear here, what I'll do is to put a print function in here. Now if I run this, I get 5. Great. So that's the first thing. So you can print so many things. So I could say that print, I can just say print 2, and Python will show me 2. Okay, I could say print let's say 3 divided by 2, and Python is going to show me 1.5, right? So that's a way you can use Python. With a print command, you can use Python as a calculator. You could do print, would say 3 times 2, and run it. Python is going to give me 6, right? So just the print command, as a beginner, you can do a lot of stuff, right? Okay, so you don't need to know a lot of code before you can start using Python. You can use this as a simple calculator for yourself. You can just to push your interest way up there. All right, so now we know the print function, what it does, and its structure. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is that we're going to look at a variable. When we talk of variables, basically it's a way of naming items in Python. So let's say I have a message which says that Kofi is a Ghanaian name. I might be using this statement in several instances, and I would find it too repetitive and too boring to be typing Kofi is a Ghanaian everywhere I'm supposed to use this statement. So what I can do is to assign this statement Kofi is a Ghanaian to something. That thing is called a variable. So I could say that I want to send this message out to 10 different people in an intercontinental class. So I can't keep typing Kofi is a Ghanaian name. Hi, Kofi is a Ghanaian name. Hi, Kofi is a Ghanaian name. What I could do is that I could say my message is Kofi is a Ghanaian name. But this, you cannot use this as it stands now because Python would not understand it. You need to put this in inverted commas or quotation marks. Once I have done this, this becomes a variable. And this variable has been assigned the value of the string Kofi is a Ghanaian name, which implies that the equal to sign here has become our assignment operator. Alright, so basically this is a variable. In choosing variable names, there are a few things you should remember. You cannot begin a variable with a number like this. It's not allowed. You cannot begin a variable with a capital letter. This is not allowed. You cannot have special characters except for the underscore. So you can't say this. These are all not allowed. But what you should have in mind is that the variable name should begin with a small case. So you could have a message. You could also have message 1, mix of numbers, but just making sure that the number doesn't start the variable name. You could also have, with an underscore. You cannot have space. You cannot say this, message 1. No, Python will treat this differently, and it will treat this differently. So you're going to get an error if you attempt it this way. So that's just a few things to remember when you are choosing variable names. Alright. So with this done, now we'll move on to the next thing, which is basically I'm going to talk about objects. In Python, everything is an object. Remember I said that when I was defining this variable, I said that this variable has a value of the string Kofi is a Ghanaian name. So now let's get into it. The first item or object we want to discuss is the string. So in Python, a string is literally anything that is put in a quotation mark. So for instance, Kofi is a Ghanaian name. Once I put that in quotes, it's a string. Once I put any number in quote, it's treated as a string. Alright, so anything you put in a quotation mark or in inverted commas, it becomes a string. So I could say 5,000 US dollars. Then it becomes a string. Right? So basically that is a string in Python. And to show that all of these examples are strings, I'll assign them to a variable. So I'll assign A to Kofi, is a Ghanaian name. I'll assign B to the integer 4. I'll assign C to 5,000 US dollars, right? So then I'm going to say that I'm going to ask Python, what is the type of A? Alright, remember I need to print it out, else I'm not going to see it. So type of A. Alright, and I'm going to do that for B. And I'm going to do that for C. I'm going to see the output is that type of A is a string, so I could, type of B is also a string, type of C is also a string, even though this is a number 4. It didn't say it's an integer, even though this is a number with a sign in front of it. It didn't say it's a currency or it's a number. So this goes to say that in Python, whatever you put in an inverted comma or in a quotation mark is treated literally as a string. Great. So the next thing we're going to talk about is an integer. I'm sure you probably have an understanding of integers. An integer is basically a whole number. Alright, so let me say x equals to 3. Let me say y equals to 77. And I'll say z equals to 45. Alright, so basically you observe, you see that I don't put these numbers in quotes or inverted commas. That's the way to define an integer. So if I tell Python to print the type of x, Python is going to tell me that it's an int. Watch out. Int is for integer. Alright. I could do the same thing for y. And I could do the same thing for z. Python is going to tell me they are integers. Right? Okay. So what if I add a 0.0 to this? Or 0.3? What do you think Python is going to tell me? An integer? No. Python will tell me that it's a float. What if I add 0.0 to this? I add 0.1. Python is still going to tell me they are all float. Float stands for floating point values. These are values that have decimal places. Yeah, so these are called floats. So floats and integers, you don't need to put them in comments. Once you put them in comments, they become strings, just like I demonstrated here. Alright, the next thing is we have the Boolean values. Boolean values are basically two types. You have the true and the false. Alright, so true or false. These are Boolean values. Or you could say true and false. They are Boolean values, whichever one you want to say. But be mindful of the spelling. They begin with capital letters. True with a capital T, false with a capital F. So let's say I ask Python to print the type of true. And I ask Python to print again the type of false. I get booleans. Bool, bool. Right? Yes, so basically those are the then we have a last type which is not a boolean, it's called a none type. So if I ask Python to print the type of none, Python will tell me it belongs to a class none type. It's a special class of its own, which you probably would not have to understand it at the basics of your study. Okay, I'll show you a few more things and then we'll end the lesson for this video, and I'll catch you up in a different video. So there's a way to convert an integer to a float and vice versa, or convert a float into an integer. There's also a way to convert a float or an integer into a string. So we call these type conversions. So I'll say type conversions, right? So the first thing is that let's convert int to float, and how we do that is to say that int, and we put our float. Remember, floats have decimal places 5.236. Okay, but if I run it, Python will just evaluate it. It will not output anything. For it to output anything, I have to put my print command here, and it gives me the integer 5. Or I could delete the print, assign this to, let's say, f, and I ask Python to print f, and it'll still give me 5. Right? Aha. So you see that this is a floating point figure that has been converted to a whole integer. Right? You could do the same thing for converting an integer to a float. So I could say that I'm assigning G the value of, let's say, 9. If I ask Python to print the value of G, you see that I get 9.0. Good. So it's interesting to note that converting a float into an integer does not round the figure up. It cuts off everything after the decimal point, no matter how big that floating number is. So let me demonstrate that. Let's say we have a value called t, which is equals to 320.9999. You expect that to normally you round it up to 321. So if I ask Python to print the type, now if I ask Python to print t, it's going to show me 320.9999. But I could convert into a float. My bad. It's going to give me 320, not 321. Sorry, I mean an int. And it gives me 320. Right, so you should take note when you want to round something up, it's really not the int function that you use. If you want to round up, there's a function for it, it's called round. We haven't gotten there yet. Probably you'd encounter it when you do a lot of mathematics with Python. Great. So you could also convert, like I was saying, integers to strings, because I already demonstrated that here. By putting this into a quote, it becomes a string. Alright, so I think that'll be it for today.